Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for the data-driven case for compassion and how to coach for it. I know your schedules are really busy, and we really appreciate you taking the time to learn with us today. So my name is Lucy Sullivan. I'm going to be your host today, along with my colleague, Debbie Morris, who's here. Debbie is newer to MRG, so welcome her aboard. We're very excited to have her here with us today. So before we begin, just a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording today's webinar. So you'll get a link to that recording. You will get the slides. We do a blog post that has a summary of the things we talked about. We have more bonus resources. All of that will be coming to your inbox after the webinar. So no worries about that. To stay focused during the webinar, we have the chat closed and your cameras are off, but we absolutely want to hear from you. It's one of our favorite parts of doing these, honestly. So any questions that you have, you can pop those into the Q&A as soon as they come to you. We'll take a couple breaks for Q&A during the presentation, but you don't need to wait for those to ask your questions. As soon as something comes to mind, put it in there. Any questions that we don't get a chance to answer during the webinar, we actually will follow up with you. We make sure that you get your answers, and we really enjoy that as well. It's a very stimulating part of the presentation for us. So please, drop your questions in anytime you like. I will give you just a brief introduction of who MRG is and who you'll be hearing from today. So MRG Assessments, we're a global leader in designing assessments that impact people in profound and meaningful ways. We have solutions for leadership, motivation, personal development, sales, and we've been supporting coaches and working with assessments for over 40 years now. We work very closely with coaches and we do a lot of coaching ourselves. Both of your presenters today are coaches. We have more than 2 million participants in our assessment database at this point, which is amazing and which Maria loves to dig into. So we leverage that research to create the presentations that we do for you, that we're the one we'll be doing today. So you'll hear from Maria. She's the head of research and education at MRG. Maria's PhD is from Vanderbilt, and she's conducted award-winning research on educational practices. She just got back from presenting a workshop at SIOP. You may have seen her at Society of Consulting Psychology, the European Mentoring and Coaching Council. Maria loves to share our research and our work around the world, really. And Christine is an executive coach and an educator here at MRG, and she's been with us for more than 15 years after a career in education. Christine is an ICF certified coach and a huge breadth and depth of coaching experience, which she will share with us today. And she's played a critical role in developing MRG's educational materials as well. So those will be your presenters. That's who I'll hand you off to in just a moment. Here's what they'll be covering. So on our agenda today, the business case for compassion. Why are we here? I think we all, many of us, if you were drawn to this topic, you probably have a heartfelt case for compassion. But we want to talk about how there's actually a bottom line case for it as well. Then we have some new research to reveal some ways that compassionate leaders are unique from their less compassionate counterparts. So Maria will be sharing that. And then we'll go into really the tactics of coaching for compassion. So helping leaders who may not naturally be behaving in a compassionate way, how do we help them make those key behavior shifts? And Christine will take us through a really cool case study where we actually get to see this in action. What does it look like to take somebody, understand how they're leading now, and help guide them through those behavior shifts so they can be more compassionate in the future? So that's our agenda. And before we get started, we just wanted to do a quick poll. When it comes to delivering, let me just launch my poll for you folks. When it comes to, I'll do the question first. So when it comes to delivering bottom line results, when you think about compassionate leaders, are compassionate leaders less effective, more effective, or about the same when you compare them against lower compassion counterparts? When we think of those, and Maria, when we think of those bottom line competencies, like what are we thinking about there?
Exactly. Not just the soft skills, right? Are they less, more, or about the same when it comes to that bottom line business stuff, right?
Interesting to see what people think.
Yeah.
Fun to get a little input on this.
Yeah, you never know what you're getting with the polls.
I know that's this is the wild card. We can practice everything else. We can be so careful with our slides, but you never know what your poll results are going to deliver. So you all get to give us the big surprise of the hour.
Yeah, and let us know. It helps us see what you're kind of seeing out there as well,
right?
Which is always informative for us.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, we've got most folks on. So I'm going to share our results. All right.
Okay.
So about 10% thinking it's about the same, 80% feel like our compassionate leaders are probably more effective in those areas, and 10% feel like they're less effective. All right, well, I'm excited. Maria will be sharing some research soon, and we'll get to see how this plays out. So I believe with that, I will hand things off to Maria.
Okay, thank you, Lucy, and thank you everyone for being here. So the answer to the poll question will come up when we share, when we reveal some of those research findings today. So stay tuned, you will get to see that. Okay, so we are here, and I'm going to turn off my camera so it's less distracting and we can focus on the slides. Okay, so the business case for compassionate leadership. Why are we here? As Lucy mentioned, if you're here, I think there's value to compassionate leadership, but let's share with you some of what we have been finding as we've been researching this over the last few years. We're working with people, right? Employees are people, and people are overwhelmed right now. They're stressed, they're close to burnout. There's a lot going on. We just went through a pandemic. There's a lot of polarization around the world, right? And a lot of what's going on around in our lives, right? We take to work with us, right? Employees are sensing that. In fact, I think it's safe to say there's an epidemic of unhappiness at work right now. And Gallup looked into this. They surveyed workers worldwide and found that the majority don't feel engaged at work or are emotionally detached. About a fifth are miserable at work. I mean, miserable, that's kind of a big deal, right? Not just, upset, but miserable. When they looked at workers in the US, there we go, they found that about half are feeling stressed on a daily basis, 41% worried, and about a fifth are either sad or angry on a daily basis. So I don't, saying there's an epidemic of unhappiness at work doesn't seem to be a stretch, right? There's definitely something going on right now. And so how do we help people feel better, or how do we start to overcome this? Well, the answer might lie in leadership, right? Leadership can make a difference. In fact, there are two recent studies that support this idea. One by Gallup as well found that about 30% of the variance in team engagement is accounted for by leadership, by what the leaders of a team are doing. In another study, it was found that 35% of employees report that lack of trust in their leaders is the main reason for job satisfaction. So leaders are making a difference right now in how people are engaging at work, how they're feeling about their work. And there is a potential for leaders through compassion to really make a difference in how people are feeling. And let's not forget about Gen Z, right? Gen Z numbers are growing in the workforce. It was, according to the US Department of Labor, about 18% of the total workforce was Gen Z by Q2 in 24. And that number is expected to go up to 25% in 2025. And we are seeing that in our database, right? Gen Z is definitely growing in numbers. The thing with that is that Gen Z workers are more stressed. They're more anxious than ever before. And that means they're going to need a little more support, right? The goal of leadership is to help their employees become leaders themselves, right? And be able to contribute to that workforce. So something like compassion can really help Gen Zers come to their own and be the workers and the leaders we need them to be moving forward. So that brings us to our study, right? Discovering what makes compassionate leaders unique. And there are a few things we're going to look at here, right, in terms of uniqueness. What are they bringing to the workplace? How are they helping their teams and the people they're working with? But then also what makes them unique in terms of behavior, and how can we use that to help leaders become more compassionate, if that is a goal of theirs. So first things first, right? What is compassion? How did we define it? There are 3 steps to compassion in a leadership setting. One is a need needs to be recognized, right? So the leader who's going to potentially be compassionate needs to recognize a need in another individual. Then they have to have a genuine feeling of empathy or concern for what that person is going through, but it does not stop there, right? They need to take that empathy and turn it into action. And that's what we call engaging in compassionate leadership, doing something, right? Taking action to reduce that person's suffering, right? So recognize, have a genuine sense of empathy for that person or group of people, and then doing something to reduce that suffering, that anxiety, that stress that they are sensing in the other person. So how do we study this? Now we have the advantage of having a database from the with the LEA 360 Leadership Effectiveness Analysis 360 assessment, and we can go in there and look for answers in the data that we have. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about the assessment first. The LEA 360 measures 22 behaviors from 4 perspectives. So you're pretty much standard 360 in terms of the perspectives: self, boss, peers, and direct reports. All the behavioral measures, all 22 behaviors, are meant to be descriptive, right? What is someone doing? How much are they emphasizing these 22 behaviors relative to each other? And it uses a semi-ipsative question design, and I will show you in the next slide what that looks like. Now, the LEA also measures 32 leadership competencies, and those are measured from 3 observer perspectives. So just the boss, the peers, and the direct reports. And these are evaluative, right? They're supposed to, or they're meant to provide feedback for the leader on how effective they are in each of these 32 different areas of leadership. So here's what the semi-ipsative measure looks like, okay? You can see here that this is the one that measures behavior and looks at it from the self, the boss, the peer, and the direct report perspectives. So there's a prompt, right? When I have set an objective, and then it has 3 options associated with it. These 3 options, as you will notice, are value neutral, right? There's nothing innately good about them. They're also quite specific, right? So it allows the leader and their observers to identify what makes this, what this person would do in that particular context, in a way that would reflect what they're doing, not what, might be considered good or, bad, positive, or negative. You will notice that there is a forced choice component. They have to decide what is most like the leader, what is next, but there's also magnitude collected here, right? It's not just most, but 5 or 4, for example. And so what this does, for me as a researcher, it gives me a broad set of data to work with, but from for the leader, it gives them a really nuanced view about how they're being perceived by others, right? And that is the advantage of the semi-ipsative design. That's what we're seeing on there. The fact that it's both forced choice and allows us to collect information about magnitude. The other type of question is the one that collects information about those 32 competencies. And that is, as I mentioned before, from the observer perspectives. You can see an example of one here. It's an anchored rating question, Likert type question, where leaders are scored on a scale of 1 to 7. Based for each of the 32 areas of leadership. And that really allows them to receive feedback on how effective they are in these 32 different areas. Okay, so now that we know where the data come from and what we are measuring, let's dig a little deeper into that definition of high compassion leader. Now, we are looking at compassion in a leadership sense, right? How can leaders show compassion at work, right? With the people they are working with, the people they are managing, their peers, and so on. So in order to define this, we chose 6 out of the 32 competencies measured by the LEA that directly show empathy in action or compassion. So number 1 is being fair and equitable, right? Treating others fairly, treating others with equity. Being inclusive, right? Making sure everyone feels like they have a voice. Creating psychological safety, making sure that people feel safe to use their voice, to make mistakes, and so on. being ethical and expecting others to behave ethically as well. Developing others, right? Allowing room for mistakes, allowing room for growth. And finally, managing conflict. And this one might seem like a little bit of an outlier there, but think about it. We're talking about leadership, compassion in the context of leadership. And when conflict is managed, leaders are reducing the friction, right? And the stress among the people who are going through any kind of conflict. Okay, so we have 6 competencies here out of the 32 that show compassionate leadership or empathy in action. To define a high compassion leader, all we ask, the criteria were that they score in the top half of all 6 compassion competencies, right? So any leader who was above average on all 6 of these was classified as a high compassion leader in our study. So we had almost 6,000 leaders. It's a global study, many industries included, as you can see here. And I think we're ready to share some of the 3 big insights we got from this research. So insight number 1, finding number 1 about compassionate leadership. Compassionate leaders are rare, right? So what we found was that only 15.7% of leaders in that sample of almost 6,000 leaders met our definition, right? That definition of high compassion leader. What this tells us is this is not something that comes naturally to a lot of leaders, right? So if leaders want to be more compassionate, a lot of them may need to be coached, right? They may need some support in order to get to that point where they're showing compassion. And that's part of what we're here to talk about today. So we're going to help you figure out how you can coach leaders to be more compassionate if they don't fall in that 15.7%. Okay, finding number 2. Compassionate leaders are more effective. So it looks like 81% of you figured this out when you answered the poll question. So we compared high compassion leaders to other leaders. And what we found is that they were rated higher on overall leadership effectiveness, right? On their total impact in their role than their less compassionate counterparts. And the effect size there was rather large. So this is truly, a differentiator, right? They were more effective. And they were seen as more effective in other competencies related to the bottom line. So they were rated higher on delivering results, business aptitude, making effective decisions, and credibility with management, among others. So it's not just about the people stuff, right? Compassionate leaders are more effective in a broader sense. Okay, so I think there's potentially some concern about spending too much time on something that could be kind of a soft skill, but it turns out it's a little more than that. So how do we help leaders become more compassionate? Well, this research found 9 key behaviors that distinguish highly compassionate leaders from other leaders in our sample. And you'll remember high compassion leaders are those who scored above average on all 6 of the compassion competencies. We took that group of leaders and we compared them to all other leaders to find what behaviors, what behaviors distinguish them from those other leaders. What are they doing differently that makes them more compassionate? So there were 9 key behaviors that distinguish those high compassion leaders. 5 of them, here we go. There we go. 5 behaviors are behaviors that high compassion leaders are doing more than other leaders. So behavior number 1 that they're doing more of is showing empathy, right? Showing genuine concern for others. Not surprising. That's part of the definition of compassion. So of course, we would expect to see that there. They tend to be more strategic in their thinking. And that means they're thinking about the future, the implications of their actions, how broadly their actions can affect others, and their decision making, right? They tend to spend more time asking for input, getting other people's opinions as they're making decisions. They spend time communicating clearly, making sure they're understood, keeping people informed as they're working on projects or tasks with them. And finally, they spend more time cooperating with others, right? Being more accommodating and compromising at times for the sake of the team. So 5 behaviors that high compassionate leaders are doing more than other leaders. Now, there were 4 behaviors that high compassion leaders are doing less than others. I will let you know those labels in brackets are the names of the dimensions on the LEA 360. So I know some of you are certified or familiar with the LEA 360, so we wanted to make sure we included those here as well. Okay, so what are the 4 behaviors that high compassion leaders do less? 1, they tend to be less pushy and forceful in their approach. They tend to spend less time working autonomously, right? Going off on their own and following their own hunches when making decisions. They tend to be more selective about when they're very straightforward about providing feedback, right? When they're providing very direct feedback to others. And finally, they spend more time focusing on really ambitious goals, on those stretch goals, right? So they're not going to zero. It doesn't mean they stop doing these 4 things. They're just doing less of that than other leaders. They're more selective about when they're using them. And similarly, with the 5 behaviors they're doing more, they're not like, flooring it and doing that all the time. They are doing it more than their less compassionate counterparts. But they're always engaging in a variety of behaviors as they go about their leadership. Okay, that was a lot of information. So we are going to pause for questions.
Yes, we have a lot of very thoughtful ones. So I'm going to get started. And remember, if we don't get to all of them right now, we have another Q&A break at the end, and we'll follow up with you individually if there's anything we don't get to. A very quick one, Maria, and I don't know this off the top of my head. Those Gallup polls that we shared, do you have a sense of when they were? I feel like
they were either last year or the year before. They're within
Yeah.
the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll find out when
We can,
Christina's
yeah.
presenting, and I'll share it in the
Thanks.
yeah.
And I think in the deck, that link will be in there to the direct research as well.
Oh, absolutely.
You go over again, and I won't put a timer on you, but what does semi-ipsative mean? Just because we have used the terminology a lot, and I want to make sure people have a chance to understand it if they don't know the assessment. So
now, thank you for the opportunity to share it again. We love the semi-ipsative design. It's one of the unique things about the LEA in any of our assessments. It's that what I showed you, right? There's a prompt and 3 options. And when people are responding to it, they have to, there's a forced choice component where they have to pick out of those 3 options, which one is most like the person they are rating or or themselves, and which one is next like them, right? So they're ordering them for that person. And that makes it ipsative, right? That's the forced choice part of it. But what makes it semi-ipsative is that they also have to indicate magnitude of agreement. So for something that is most like a person, you still have to say 5 or 4, right? And what that does is it really allows us to show to the leader when they're getting their report, this is a lot like you, or this is more like you than some of these other things, but it may not be the thing that totally, that I think about when I think about you. So there's a lot of nuance, I think, when it comes to this type of design that you can get, you can get a lot of nuance out of it.
Thanks.
Hopefully that answers the question.
We have some great material on the semi-ipsative format too. I'll make sure that goes into the follow-up materials. Once it clicks, but it's not something everybody uses. It's one of the reasons MRG assessments are unique.
It's used a lot in academic research.
Yeah.
So it's a highly researched methodology. I'm surprised it's not used more in these types of assessments, but hey, we can't all be great. Just kidding.
Just for a clarifying question, the 6 pillars, I'm thinking of those pillars because they're vertical, of compassionate leadership, right? Were those based on a semi-ipsative question or on a Likert scale?
Yes. So the 6 pillars, the competencies are based, the 6 defining competencies for compassionate leadership are competencies. They're based on the anchored rating scale. Because they're about effectiveness, right? How effective is this person in these 6 areas? Now, the 9 behaviors are behaviors, right? So we're using both types of measurement in this research. But good
These are
clarification there.
these are really good and thoughtful questions. So we'll get to more at the end too if we don't get to too many. Um, who are you assess like where does the data come from? How diverse are these polls based on race, economic background, things like that? Like what does our research pool look like?
Yeah, so our assessment, so our research database comes from people who are using the assessment mostly as type of leadership development programs, executive development programs. Those tend to be the main reasons for using the LEA. Although there are succession planning, there are other ways that it is used. So it's reflective of the leadership population and management population out there. So you saw the gender split. In terms of race and ethnicity, it's a little less diverse. That's just unfortunately what leadership looks like. We can offer more details about that if anyone is interested. And I forget what the other areas they may have been the person may have been asking about, Lucy. But it's reflective of the leadership population.
Of a leadership population. Yeah. So there's a certain
Yeah.
self-selection element in the fact that it's, organizations that are choosing to assess their leaders. But it is a global study. So there is diversity in that sense.
Absolutely.
So I think for time, we're going to jump to Christine's section, but these questions are amazing. They make me want to do a whole nother webinar where we just go into these. So please keep them coming because we will absolutely do as many as we can today and share more answers with you afterwards. I'm also going to drop a link in the chat for if you don't know the LEA and you would like to know more about it. I'll pop a link in there so you can get a little more information about the LEA itself, get to know it, maybe give it a try. All right, I will let us move on to Christine's section. And yes, but keep the questions coming.
Okay, thank you, Lucy, and thank you, Maria. That was great. I'm also going to take my video off and get going on coaching for compassion. So, okay, we've learned all of the information. Now, what do we do to help leaders make these 9 key behavior shifts? So, first of all, here's a reminder of what Maria went on, discussed with us about behaviors that high compassion leaders emphasize more and behaviors that they do less. And so before you get overwhelmed and you're like, how the heck am I going to work with people and, help them to make these shifts? Please be aware that there are 2 reasons not to get overwhelmed. The first thing is that not every leader, not even every lower compassion leader, will need development on all 9 behaviors. Some of them will need work on 3, some of them will need work on more. But first of all, we want to figure out, what does this person need to develop in order to develop their compassionate leadership style? And then secondly, there are themes within these 9 shifts, and the behaviors can be developed in tandem. So oftentimes when you're working on one behavior, other behaviors shift as well. So it's not quite as overwhelming as it might seem. So how do we figure out what each leader needs to work on? Well, for us, we use the LEA 360, as Maria has discussed earlier. Here's an example of what some of the feedback looks like, where you've got the results on the 22 leadership behaviors from the perspective of the self, boss, peers, and direct reports. And again, what we're trying to figure out is, what should this particular leader be doing in order to become a more compassionate leader? So why do we focus on behavior? Well, first of all, it's actionable, right? When you're looking at behavior, it's something that can be observed. It's something that can be understood. It's clear, and people can take action on it. Secondly, it's neutral. As Maria stated before, there's nothing inherently good or bad about any of these 22 behaviors that we're measuring. And the feedback is presented to them in that way so that it's not like a judgment on them. They're not good or bad people. It's like, oh, what can I do? What can I adjust to make myself a more compassionate leader? It's contextual. So some behaviors are more important for a particular leader based upon what they're dealing with. For example, the behavior of persuasive, being, convincing others, using your language to win people over, might be more important for a director of sales than it is for an accountant who's working by himself or herself in a back room. right? So in this case, we would say, wow, persuasive is really important for that person, maybe less important for someone else. Although for one particular accountant, maybe persuasive is important for them. So we really need to look at the context of not only their role, but what's important in their organization, what's important for their particular situation, and what's important for them as an individual. Okay, so you really need to look at the context. And then behaviors are malleable. Okay, it's not an inherent personality quality that I can't change. I was born with and I can't change about myself. They're observable. They're something that you can shift and you can make changes to. So it's really important to note that we see behavior change as a dial, not a light switch. So it's not like when we're working with people, it's like, oh, you're going to flip the switch and all of a sudden you're going to be a highly compassionate leader. No, you're going to dial up some specific behaviors, see what happens, and see what the effects are. And sometimes a little change can make a big difference. So let's get a little more detail about the 5 behaviors to boost, to increase more, to emphasize more for compassionate leadership. So the first one is showing empathy. There was a question in the Q&A about how do we define empathy? In our assessment, we're really talking about showing your concern for someone, acknowledging what's going on for another person and letting them know that you've noticed them and that you care about them. Okay, so less about taking the action is kind of in some of the other behaviors, but the empathy is really around showing that concern. The next one, thinking strategically. That's a funny one, right? You don't necessarily think about that as far as increasing compassionate leadership. But when you're thinking strategically, you're thinking big picture. You're not so focused on the get it done, make it happen. You're thinking, okay, how does what we do here, how is this going to affect the bottom line? Is what I'm doing really having the effect that I want it to have? What are our top priorities in the big picture sense? And that is really helpful to help people to think and behave in a more compassionate way. Asking for input. This is what we call consensual in the instrument. When you're asking for input, you're getting more information, you're hearing other people's perspectives, you're taking into account what they're saying when you're making decisions. Communicate clearly. Being clear and specific in your explanations, letting people know what the information that they need to do their jobs, giving them clear deadlines and clear instructions, letting your peers know the information they need in order to work with you, letting your supervisor know what's going on. All of that is important for compassionate leadership. And then cooperating with others, being willing to compromise, being willing to help others with their goals, putting aside your own goals sometimes to help others. Being a team player, basically. So that's a little more detail in the 5 behaviors to boost. And in summary, what do high compassion leaders do more? They take their time and they put others first. So it takes time to think strategically. It takes time to ask others their opinions. It takes time to communicate clearly or to show empathy, but it's so important. And in doing those, you are taking into account other people's opinions, thinking of them first before yourself. Okay, so now let's take a look at the developmental shifts, the 4 behaviors to dial down for compassionate leadership. The first one is around being forceful. So it's noting when you're being really aggressive or using forceful language or debating. Is it always necessary? Maybe there are times to use it. You don't want to be a pushover, but maybe you can pick and choose those specific times when it's really important and let a few things go at other times. Working autonomously. We call this self in the LEA assessment. So noticing how often you kind of do your own thing. Say, well, I think this is the way it should be, so this is the way we're going to go. Going rogue, kind of just saying this is how it's going to be. Noticing that and maybe not doing that as often. Providing direct feedback. Now, this one, I am often coaching people. I mean, so many of my clients, I'm asking them to increase their feedback. It is such an important thing as a leader. However, the way in which you deliver this feedback is really important. In the LEA, when we're talking about feedback, it's things like tells it like it is, you know where you stand, doesn't mince words. Okay, so maybe there's a way to deliver feedback where it's not full of emotion, where it's really looking at, here's what happened, here are the outcomes of that, where it's more of a dialogue than a monologue, asking questions. How do you think this went? What do you think you could do to make changes? So feedback, again, is important, but there are ways that you can deliver it to be more compassionate. And this last one, setting ambitious goals. Again, it's important for leaders to set ambitious goals, but if they do it without taking into account the bigger picture, without taking into account what their staff is going through, without taking into account how people feel about those ambitious deadlines and goals, they're not necessarily being compassionate. So kind of dialing that down. And again, you can see right now as we're talking about it, how these things can work together. How if you're taking in, if you're being more consensual, asking for more input, you're much less likely to work autonomously, right? If you're taking more input, you're going to know how those ambitious goals are affecting your staff. All right. So again, in summary, what do high compassion leaders do less? They dial down the forceful push and the me first. Okay. So again, don't need to get overwhelmed because these all can be really worked in tandem and in the themes. So let's take a look at a specific case study where we use this lens to coach someone. So meet Joan. She is 56. She's a VP of projects at a tech company, and she's been at her organization for 9 years. So Joan really cares about her job, like it is her identity, and she really cares about her people too. However, Joan has grown up in this industry. It's been, quite male dominated. So she's gotten the sense that she needs to prove herself, and she's constantly sort of playing defense in her work. And in doing so, she has developed a very driven, structured, and business-only manner because she's very serious about her work, feels like she needs to prove herself, so that's how she's doing it. At times, she can be dismissive or critical of others. And she also, again, because she wants to prove herself, she oftentimes will take on too much. And then also, she sometimes corrects her direct reports' work because she doesn't want anything, less than perfect to go out of her department. She keeps a really close eye on her direct reports and will often take things over from them if it's not up to her standards. So initially, her staff was annoyed and intimidated by her. At this point, they are being passive aggressive. They're just like, well, if I don't get to it, Joan will take it over for me. And they're getting annoyed and they're kind of, being defiant. And she, in turn, is feeling more and more pressure and is responding with more dominance. And leadership has heard frustration from both sides. And they basically are like, okay, you need to fix this, Joan. You need to figure this out. What actually happened, the way that she came to us was that she had applied for a promotion within her company. There were 2 internal candidates, and she was assessed as part of this selection process, and she was not chosen for the job. But as part of this process, this is where a lot of these issues were uncovered by the leadership. They were made aware of what was going on in her department. And that's when they decided to engage us for coaching for her, to help her to kind of work through this and make some shifts so that she could be more effective and her team could be happier as well. Okay, so let's take a look at her LEA 360 scores. So when we looked at her scores through the lens of compassionate leadership, we looked first at those 5 behaviors that you should dial up for high compassion leadership. So how did they show up for her? For her specifically, empathy was not too bad, right? Her peers and direct reports were in the mid-range. Her boss was pretty high, and she saw herself as pretty high. Her strategic was not quite as positive when we look through the lens of compassion. Her boss was pretty low. Peers and direct reports in the mid-range. Consensual, that's where things are going a little farther below. So consensual, again, is asking others for input, taking into account their perspectives when making decisions. So her peers and direct reports are not really seeing that very often. The boss is in the mid-range. Communication, wow. Okay, everyone agrees that she is not emphasizing communication. She's not being clear about her expectations or letting people know what's going on as much as she could. And then cooperation, this is where you're compromising, you're, being a team player. She sees herself quite high. So this was a little bit of a blind spot for her. But peers and bossy are in the mid-range and direct reports are quite low. All right, so we have some data there to work with Joan. Now let's take a look at the behaviors that, that we suggest to dial down for high compassion leadership. Dominant, ooh, there's that forceful, aggressive, debating push. Everyone sees her as really emphasizing that behavior often. Self, that is acting autonomously, independently, making your own decisions without consulting others. Everyone also sees that as high for her. Feedback, that is telling it like it is, letting people know what you think about them. That is also really, really high for her. And then production, that is pushing people hard, aggressive deadlines, really, really focusing on results, really high from direct reports and peers, mid-range for the boss. Okay, definitely need to make some shifts if we want Joan to be behaving as a high compassion leader. So what was our plan? What was our strategy? The first thing that we did was to talk about dialing up consensual. So getting more input from others. And for her specifically, it was around her one-on-one meetings. She already had one-on-one meetings with her staff members regularly. I asked her to increase, either set up separate ones just for listening or to start her one-on-ones with listening, asking open-ended questions and getting input and just listening and noting all of that information. Eventually, we thought that we might shift those to town hall meetings, especially if there was a new initiative or a new project and she just wanted to gather a bunch of input. But at this point, her relationship with her staff was so fragmented and difficult that we thought that one-on-one would work better. The next thing was to really focus on strategic. This involved creating space to slow down, incorporate the information that she had gathered from others, and really try to focus on the big picture of what she's trying to achieve. So for her specifically, I asked her to block out space in her calendar for weekly strategic summit thinking and planning time. So I do this with almost all my clients, and it's like, okay, best idea Monday morning, before you jump into your email, before you get into everything that's going on, block out some time for some deep reflecting and thinking. Next was communication. Okay, while she's doing that deep reflecting and thinking, create a communication plan. Ask yourself the question, what do I need to communicate to my staff, to my peers, to my boss in order for them to do their job the best that they can? And create a plan to make that happen this week. And another habit that I asked her to work on was when you're giving an assignment to your staff, ask them to repeat it back to you. And that could be seen as condescending, right? So first of all, I asked her to let them know, listen, I know I'm trying to work on my communication. I'm just asking you to repeat back to me so I know that what's in my head is coming out and you understand what I want you to do. Okay, letting them know ahead of time makes it seem less condescending. And then finally, dialing down dominant. So the first step was really to recognize her emotions that she's experiencing as she's going through in meetings, interacting with others. So I asked her to incorporate some self-regulation strategies. An example of that, first of all, any self-regulation starts with taking a pause. So when coaching people to pause, the first thing to do is to coach them to take a breath. So there's this great book that I recommend to a lot of my clients. It's called The Self-Talk Workout. And it's by a woman named Rachel Goldsmith-Turro. She's a professor out west somewhere, but she has this little mindfulness technique that is so quick and you can do on the spot. And it's inhale, my friend, exhale, my friend. So in your head, calling yourself your friend, just telling yourself to take a breath. It's amazing how it can work on the spot. And, I really asked her to work on that. Other things when you're coaching people to pause, if they can in the moment remind themselves, oh yeah, I'm trying to be compassionate. I'm trying to work on this. If they can let someone else speak first, if they can ask themselves an open-ended question, again, they have to have the presence of mind to do that. If they don't, just ask another person an open-minded, open-ended question. So if it's in the middle of a debate, instead of attacking, saying, well, how do you think that process would work? Or what are your ideas about, whatever it might be? Create that dialogue rather than that attack. Okay, so again, a reminder that we weren't asking Joan to completely remake herself. We were asking her to dial up a few of those higher compassion behaviors and dial down a few of the lower compassion behaviors. Okay, so what were her results? First of all, when she incorporated those one-on-one meetings, at first the staff was really hesitant, right? They were used to being kind of slammed by her. So it took them a while to open up to her. But when she continued to push through and make those happen and continue to give them the message, like, I really want to know how what I'm doing is affecting you. They started to give her the feedback that sometimes when she helped them, in quotes, it felt condescending. It felt like, she wasn't trusting them. And so that really, that came through to her loud and clear. And she started to realize how in the big picture, she was not helping her staff out. She was not truly developing them. She was not giving them the opportunity to grow. And that was not meeting her big picture objectives. And in asking them the questions, staff started to feel more heard. So they were less adversarial. They were a little more on her side. In incorporating that strategic summit, she developed more foresight. One of the things I asked her to do is to reflect back on last week. What happened? How did you contribute to that? What could have gone better? What went well? All right. And then to plan, what am I going to do this week to do it even better? What am I going to do this week to show more compassion? How am I going to communicate better? What did I do last week that maybe wasn't being a team player? I wasn't compromising as much as I could have. So again, that thinking time, so important to think bigger picture about what your goals are. So that started to happen and she was feeling better about that. And then for self-regulation, this is really, it's like your brain is like a muscle, right? It really requires you to practice self-regulation. So for her, and this is really encouraged in that book, The Self-Talk Workout, for her, it was developing a meditation practice that helped her to strengthen that muscle of taking a breath and looking at the bigger picture and remembering that, her intentions are really to be more compassionate. It wasn't again, a switch. She still sometimes reacted harshly, but sometimes she was able to prevent it or at least recognize after she did it and make amends if she needed to. So the overall message here is that compassion is critical to creating a healthy leadership culture, but it also improves effectiveness, and compassion can be coached. All right, that's what I've got for you.
Thank you so much, Christine, and right on time. And thank you everyone for the questions that are still coming in, and keep them coming. The first one I'm going to mention, Christine, if you have it, I'm sorry I didn't catch it, but the name of the book that you mentioned and the author, would you put that in the chat to everyone? I'll make sure it goes out in our follow-up resources as well, but
Yep.
I figured. I would be able to have that.
Yep.
And then just a nice comment from Eunice that I just wanted to share, because I think it is so important. When a leader is strategic, it provides direction and it greatly decreases their followers' stress. So I love that, right? Like it is, it's maybe not the traditional thought of like, what does compassion look like, in this touchy-feely sense, but it helps your people when they feel like they have direction and clarity. I like that comment.
Awesome.
Another comment, I guess, in a similar vein, how would you address the very common perception that, compassionate means more emotional, less rational, tender, weak, it's a pushover, therefore they're not a strong leader? How do you work, even maybe the person you're coaching has that perception, or they're worried that other people in the organization have that perception? How do you do the work when that's going on?
Well, the first thing is that in order to be compassionate, you have to be able to process and regulate your own emotions. And in being able to regulate your own emotions, that makes you stronger. It's really hard to be compassionate if you're so anxious yourself. And it truly is a workout. It's a skill that can be practiced and can be increased and improved over time. So it actually is a sign of strength if you're able to calm yourself down and be able to look at others and see what they're going through and be able to put them first. Secondly, all of the great research that, and Maria maybe wants to jump in even more, that shows that high compassionate leaders are actually more effective than others, even on the bottom line stuff, even on the gets things done, even on the, makes effective decisions. That's pretty sweet. And you can show, some of that real data to people who have doubts.
Yeah,
I agree with that. I have nothing to add, Christine. Yeah, our research shows it clearly. So feel free to share that with anyone who's maybe having doubts about whether it's going to make them a better leader, a stronger leader.
Another, I think in a similar vein, but I think a really important question: how do you balance the fairness issue of males versus females, whether it's seen differently in terms of compassion, and that there's maybe more of an expectation that women should be more compassionate, so male leaders get a pass on it somehow? Any perspective on that? Obviously, I wish we could say here's the answer, but what are, I think, your just perspectives from your experience?
Yeah, that is a tough one. Absolutely. Women leaders walk a smaller tightrope of what is deemed as okay for them or expected of them. I think it is a balancing act of showing kindness and empathy, and also holding people accountable. Just because I care about you doesn't mean I'm going to let you off the hook for whatever you're supposed to be doing. But you can do that. You can hold people accountable in a way that is kind and helpful, and helping to develop them as opposed to punishing them. So I think for women leaders, it's just being even more conscious of the balance of showing kindness and holding people accountable. I wish there were something to make it more fair. I don't have the answer.
I think too, Christine, I don't know if you agree with this, right? Compassion isn't the only way to be effective, right? We wouldn't say that only 15% of leaders are above average in terms of effectiveness, right? But I think it's a more feminine approach, perhaps, to leadership. And so our research shows that that works too, right? It's another way to be effective. So I think leaders will find a way to be effective that works for them. And this is one way that leaders can reach effectiveness and not shy away from it, because they might be concerned about it not working out and making them good leaders.
Great point. Thank you.
We had a great question that brings the IDI into this, which is another MRG assessment about motivation. This person gave some interesting detail, which I think would kind of make an interesting case study. I think we'll follow up with you personally on your perspective, but I think overall, just how does motivation fit into this when you're dealing with somebody who's not taking to compassion, and you want to coach them on this? How does their motivation fit in?
Right. So we do see some correlations between the IDI assessment and the LEA, specifically the IDI. So the IDI is our motivation assessment for people who are familiar with it. So there's a driver called giving. And we do find a correlation, although it's a weak one, and Maria's gonna correct me there, but it is a weak one, but there is a correlation between giving and empathy, right? So people who are low on giving means they just don't get a lot of energy from giving to others. It doesn't mean they're a bad person at all, and it doesn't mean they're not giving. It just means that it doesn't like fill them up. It's not a big motivator, and there can be plenty of reasons for that, based on past experiences or whatever. All right, so let's say you've got a low giving person and you want them to become a more compassionate leader. Well, one of the positive things about all the different behaviors that you can dial up is that many of them are not, they're mostly not personality or motivation based. So for example, if somebody is just like, look, I just don't care about my staff member's dog dying or, whatever their sister's going through, right? But I can ask them questions about what they think about with this project. That's that consensual behavior. I can make sure that they have all the information that they need in order to do their job. So some of those behaviors are not motivation related, but they can still be developed, and that leader can still become a more compassionate leader.
Let's see. I think we can take one more. The LEA specifically, we talk sometimes about doing a retest in 12 to 18 months. That's one way to measure progress. Any thoughts on measuring more incremental progress in the meantime, or on the specific behavior somebody's targeting? How would you work with them to understand more, quantitatively in real time, how they're adjusting?
Sure. There are a few different strategies. Sometimes we develop surveys, like on the spot surveys, that can be given, based on specific behaviors that are looking at, let's say we just wanted to look at the compassionate behaviors, and I wouldn't measure all 9. I would choose maybe 3, and maybe once a month or after a certain meeting or something, just develop like a little survey monkey and say, how did I do in this area, on a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 7, and then, put a little box in for more information. So if you do that monthly, that can give you, you want to do it at the beginning first to get a baseline, and then that can give you, some nice specific measures in a particular area. Another way is just to keep that dialogue open. So to make sure that, when they're talking to their staff in a month from now, they're asking them, okay, I said I was working on these things. How's that going? To be able to get some more specific measurement, at least anecdotally, about how things are going for them.
Thank you so much. That's all we have time for. There are a few questions that we didn't get to, but Maria and Christine are wonderful experts who will follow up with you. So we will get to your answers, and those will appear on the blog as well, which we'll send out, which is really fun. So you can see the answers to any questions that we didn't have a chance to ask today. So you will get the slides and the recording, resources and samples and things that we referenced. We'll pull all that together. There was a lot of great stuff in there. That'll all be in your follow-up email. We'll send a survey, so you can tell us what other topics you might want to explore with us. In the chat, you'll see I dropped the next webinar registration in there, so you can join us again. We're going to be talking Gen Z. And we have certifications coming up. I'll send a link to those as well in the follow-up materials. If you're interested in the LEA, if you're like, well, let me check out a little more, understand this assessment a little better, there's a link in the chat, or just say hey in the Q&A and let us know, and we'll absolutely reach back out to you. We'd love to share more about that, help you get to know the semi-ipsative format if that's something you're interested in using in your practice. And that is all for today. Maria and Christine, thank you so much. And thank you, everyone. This was a really great Q&A with a lot of really thoughtful questions. So we really appreciate your being here and your participation. What a great group.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank
Have a great day.